Hello and welcome to the first Games Insight Month 2025 recording. We had a wonderful session today. It was a hybrid session, so we had a studio audience as well as our wonderful panel of guests here today in the Ukie office. Thank you for joining this video and checking out this video. I guess what to expect from this session: the four horsemen, self-styled four horsemen of the UK games industry, a lawyer, an accountant, an insurer, and a banker, all sit down to share their top tips and war stories from their time spent advising UK indie game studios from behind the scenes. They've got some really interesting insights and quite a valuable, unique take on the industry from their individual sort of perspectives. So enjoy watching Isabel Davies from Wiggin, Isla MacGillivray from Saffery, Phil Wildman from GG Insurance, and Gavin Smith from Aburthnot Latham, discussing a range of topics from avoiding common business pitfalls to making your money work harder. And we also answer some questions from the audience, both in the studio and joining us on the webinar today. Enjoy.
Tremendous. We should get going then. I did a small introduction for you guys, but if you want to sort of introduce yourselves, that would be really good.
Well, thanks very much, Leo. So as Leo right pointed out, we're everyone's favourite people, external advisors for the games industry. For those of you I've not met, my name is Isabel Davies and I'm a senior associate at Wiggin. I'm a video games lawyer. I've been in the video games industry now for coming up to 12 years, spent my whole career in the games industry. So looking forward to talking a bit about some legal bits today.
Yeah, hi guys, so I'm Gav. As Dave said, I work for Aburthnot Latham, so I lead on the video games industry for the bank. Not as much time as yourself, it's about 6-7 years been supporting the industry, and just kind of keen to. There's been a lot of changes, I guess, over the last few years, so it feels like a good time to regroup and see what's coming next.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Phil Wildman. I started GG Insurance about 6 or 7 years ago now. So I've been doing insurance in the Lloyd's market for 20 years. I've been playing games all my life, and I found a way that we can sort of combine my hobby with what I do professionally. And it's been great to work with all sorts of companies now, from sort of small indies up to big international publishers. And we get to see kind of behind the scenes of these companies in an interesting sort of unique perspective. So yeah, hopefully we can share some interesting stuff with you guys.
My name is Isla MacGillivray. As Leo said, I'm a partner at Saffery, which is an accountancy firm based in the UK and Ireland. I'm currently head of our film and TV and video games team, and we work with a whole range of clients from companies and individuals, generally providing corporate and advisory services.
Nice. So Gav, I think we're going to do some little opening speeches. Speeches is maybe a bit too grand, but I think we've all got a few insights just to kind of kick off the conversation. So should we start with you?
Yeah, no, thank you. It's, as I said, I guess it's a couple of seconds ago, it's been an interesting few years, to say the least. And I guess in the kind of role that I do, I get to see everything from a much broader perspective because, I'm not focused on one particular part of the games industry. I guess it's all of it. So I guess this, not surprisingly, I guess some of the sort of key things that we're seeing is a sort of resurgence of the indie studio. I think for multiple reasons, whether that's some of the slowing down of investment or some of the acquisitions that have happened over the years that haven't all gone to plan. So there's luckily some really good stories coming out of that where companies are able to split amicably and sort of crack on as an indie studio. So that's really nice to hear. But I think the gist of that is probably just getting back to making games that people want to play. I think there's been a lot of noise about a lot of different things over the years, whether that's NFTs, blockchain, metaverse, obviously now AI. But in reality, is I think there's still fundamental market for people who just like to play really fun games. So that's kind of what I'm seeing. I think some of the numbers that have come out last year now, depending on how accurate this is, and on the industry code that people use when they register their company's house, we did see around a 24% increase last year in new studios forming. Again, not as surprising, whether that's people starting again or leaving they've just sold their business. I thought, actually, I'm not just going to sit here. I'm going to just go again and see what happens this time. So, but it's nice to see. But I think obviously now got to try and figure out what does that mean, you know, for the next kind of couple of years. There's a lot of new startups, but you know, there's still the fundamental need of a publisher or, you know, investment, also an injection of cash into, you know, to get things moving. So I think we'll see, you know, I'm seeing different variations of that at the moment, but I am starting to see some activity coming back again. So I think people want to do it. I think there has been an element of people taking less risk just because of what's happened over the last 5 to 6 years. But you know, I think there's still been enough success stories, for instance, whether that's, you know, like Kenshi or, you know, or Vampire Survivors, games like that have, you know, been started by, you know, indie studios, and they've done it very differently, and they've been able to sort of turn that into sort of a really successful business and sort of take and sort of grow organically, I guess, over time. So I think there is a model that can be sort of, I say followed, but yes, the game has got to attract and sell, but it can be done. So I think now's the time. Even I feel like it was I said this 6 years ago, so I'm going to say again, just keep there to surround yourself with the right kind of people. I think some of the network has changed probably just because of how the industry shifted. So the nice thing about, I guess, what we all do is that we can sort of have many different contacts in different places, because that's, you know, we're not relying on those, but we can have those contacts, and hopefully they can be useful to studios out there. I guess some of the other areas, obviously, look, I'm not going to go into details, it's just depressing, but obviously in the US, obviously there's all the tariff issues at the moment. We haven't really seen what impact that's going to have to the UK yet, but I didn't, you know, one thing I did see was US companies setting up UK subsidiaries last year. So hopefully, you know, I do think we're still an attractive place, you know, as a country to kind of make a game. We're probably still cheaper than the US in general to make a game. So I think there's still a lot of good opportunity, but it's just very fragmented at the moment. So it's difficult to find sort of a set pattern of play. But so that's kind of what I'm seeing. And so yeah, well, you know, I think totally today, between the four of us, there'll be enough sort of hints and tips and things to follow up with afterwards as well. So
good points and bad points, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Pretty much, yeah.
Phil, I'd be interested to hear from you, I guess, kind of what, you know, kind of what risks you're seeing set to what kind of trends you're seeing from an insurance point of view, because I expect you're probably seeing a lot of interesting movements, particularly over the last year or so.
Yeah, it's been a pretty wild ride, I'd say, these last couple of years. So, you know, everything was sort of doing so well in COVID. There was so much money sort of coming into the industry, which was great. But we insure quite a few companies at different stages, at different sizes. So we see quite an interesting sort of slice of the industry. And you know, everybody was saying, oh, last year they were saying, oh, survive till 25. And so many of the companies that we work with, we're seeing trying to shift what they're doing to make their business more sort of sustainable long term. So it's not just about like, oh, this is going to last forever. It's like, how can we make a sustainable business going forward? So how can we keep the lights on and keep paying the bills? So we're seeing companies that are sort of shifting from just focusing on their big smash hit that they're dreaming about, their big first party IP, to like, well, maybe we need to be doing a bit more code there, maybe we need to be doing a bit more work for hire. And they're like, okay, well, let's do like 3 days on Codev and then 2 days on our project, and then that's becoming 4 days and 1 day, and then it's like evenings and weekends and stuff. So you know, when we're getting companies that come to us and they're like renewing their insurance, we're having to reassess. We're like, what are you doing new? What are your new risks? We're talking to one company at the moment where they've figured out I can't talk too much about it, but they figured out a really novel way to implement the tech that they built for their games into real world applications in sort of museums and shops and airports and so on. And so that's really cool, but now their risk profile's completely changed because they're in the meat space in the real world interacting with people. So we're having conversations with them about, well, what if these things cause without giving too much away, what if it falls onto somebody and that's an injury liability? And like, we never thought about it in those terms, like who's manufacturing these physical products. And so we're seeing, that's just one example. We're seeing so many companies that are shifting and pivoting and changing and adapting to try and survive. So their risk profiles are dramatically changing. So lots of interesting conversations with them, and we're seeing more and more companies looking for how can they do more work in less time. AI is a real, I can't say it's a buzzword, it's just here now. It's part of I think everybody's worked at some stage, even though some people don't like to admit it. When studios start talking about AI, they're asking me, oh, can we be insured if we use AI? And then it's like, well, what are you using it for? And I think a lot of people that don't use it think, oh, AI is just going to make the whole game for me. But I think there's some really cool applications for it. I was looking at something the other day. I was mucking around with Unreal Engine, and I was asking, because I'm making a little thing myself just for fun, and I was asking about, what about how do we make this more accessible for people? And AI gave me all these brilliant tips on, color blindness and this and that. And so I think there's really, good applications for things like that. But I'm also mindful that some studios are thinking about how can we not cut corners, but if we're just in survival mode, how can we get to the end goal as quickly and cheaply as possible? And sometimes that does mean, taking more risks. And we've had a few conversations with studios where they're like, well, I mean, look, we're not going to, we might not be here in 6 months. So, we're not bothered about all these questions you're asking about this risk and that risk. And what about your cyber security and blah, blah, blah. They're like, we don't care, because if we don't get this right, the company's gone anyway. So yeah, it's been definitely a wild ride. And I think things are calming down and getting better, but we're not out of the woods yet.
Yeah, makes sense. I feel like there's some sort of pun between wild riding your surname. that we played on it. Maybe a blog piece of thing there. And Ida, I guess there must be a lot going on in your world at the moment, right? Because we're in proper VJET territory now. What kind of trends are you seeing? How have things changed from a tax perspective and accounting perspective in the last couple of years?
VJEC and the move from VGTR, so video games tax relief, onto the new expenditure credit is sort of one of the bigger talking points in our world as accountants and tax advisors. You are right. So from 1st of April 25 onwards, if you're starting development for your new game, you have to go with VJEC. If you started before that, you still have the VGTR option up to 31st March 27. Truthfully, what have we seen? Video game developers are staying with VGTR as long as they possibly can, is the trend. Even though there is a small bump in the rate for VJEC, the sort of move away from EEA spend qualifying is the big thing for a lot of video games companies. What I would say with that is actually sometimes when you look under the hood, the move from EEA to UK spend only doesn't move the dial that much or at all, actually, because we've got the 80% cap. So if all your EEA expenditure fell into that 20%, you're still going to get as much, if not a little bit more, with the 0.5% extra under the new legislation. I think as well, there's some additional disclosure requirements that are required that for some studios, maybe that's a reason to sort of delay putting it off, not because they don't want to disclose it, it's just more work to put together the additional disclosures around connected parties. I guess just thinking about it a little bit more is we are going to have to move onto VJEC, and it is still a hugely beneficial thing to any video game development company. I guess the key thing is you have to be a company to claim it. So if you're just operating as a sole trader still, you can't. So if that's your world, maybe have a think if it's worthwhile going down the company route to see if VGTR or VJEC is worth accessing. But I just always think it's an incentive here in the UK that is really beneficial, to the point that there are other jurisdictions that now have video games incentives, which just proves the success and how helpful it has been here in the UK. And I just think if you're spending the money and it would qualify, don't leave it on the table. Yes, you probably want someone to give you a helping hand, but if your claim is reasonably straightforward, there are people that can help at all ends of the scale. So just making sure that you're sort of tracking your costs, you're thinking about things in terms of what will qualify and what won't, so you're getting an accurate estimate. It's cash in your bank account 9 times out of 10, so please don't leave that money on the table. I guess the other sort of talking point related to that is under VJEC, we now have the used or consumed principle, which didn't exist under VGTR, which I think is putting some people off, but actually at a very simplistic level, if it would have qualified as UK spend before, it still will. But there will probably be additional costs that maybe you've not thought of that will now also be UK qualifying spend. So just, yeah, making sure you're making that claim if you are able to. I think most video game developers kind of just got up to speed on the VGTR of it all, and then we moved the dial, things changed, and I know that can be really frustrating. But the entry and the access point is exactly as it's always been, so don't worry too much about changing name. Some of the principles are changing, but the way that you qualify for it still remains the same. So hopefully people are still thinking about that move on. To Phil and Gav's point, in terms of the industry's changing, and sort of maybe more indie breakouts and the cash is king thing, this is cash in your bank account. So you're, no matter how profitable you are as a business, if you don't have cash in your bank account, you're not going to be able to keep going. So this is an additional way to hopefully get some cash in your bank account. It comes in after you've spent the money, which I do appreciate. It's not that simple to always work, but there are lenders out there who are willing to have loans against VGEC and VGTR. So therefore, there are ways to really monetize that amount as best as possible.
Nice. I think that leads on perfectly to, I guess, the legal stuff, because I think to your point, Isla, generally the law is quite a slow moving ship. So I think for me, like the kind of core principles of like people and product are still king, at least in the legal world. So people, I think, in the last few years in particular, in the sort of post-COVID world, I think it's been really interesting. I think I've seen more intercompany disputes and grievances than I ever have previously, just because of things like fights over money, things like returning to the office, etc., have been things that have caused issues. We had one company recently who had a chief of staff who had no chief of staff experience and was actually causing disputes rather than actually helping the disputes be managed. So I always say to companies, you've got to be really, really careful generally, particularly when you get to the hiring point of like person 15 to person 20, because that's normally when you as the founder kind of start to lose maybe complete oversight and control of your staff. So those kind of like growth stories that we're hopefully now going to start seeing again, that cycle will begin. But I always try to have quite frank conversations at the start with clients saying, what's your relationship going to be like with your co-shareholders? How are you going to hire? What is the hiring going to look like? I think one trend in particular, even in the last 6 months, I think has really started to hit is just, I think clients are more wary to hire employees full-time on an indefinite basis. I think we've seen a lot more companies want to do things, either hire contractors or perhaps fixed-term employees, because I think to your point, Gav, there's much less certainty at the moment over project funding, company funding, etc. So
stay lean, unfortunately.
Got to stay lean.
It's helpful in some places, but then obviously for very experienced people, looking to kind of have something a little bit more sturdy in their own personal lives, it's I think everyone's just kind of, but then there's also the level of competition as well. So you do feel like is everyone kind of chasing the same roles, whereas before there was, it was kind of 5-6 years ago, it was the other way around. There wasn't enough roles going, and now so there was more roles available. Now there isn't, but there's more people looking for those positions. So yeah, it's definitely not the ideal situation. I think just on Phil's point, I think how people are adapting, I think it does it kind of adds some, well, causes you more work basically, but it also means that there is an opportunity. People are thinking now, okay, what else can I do with this? And I think when we did a panel before, I mentioned about sort of cross IP opportunities, and it's similar. I think it's not always the same way. Just going, can a game made into a TV show or a film, or vice versa? It's are there other interactive possibilities with the technology that sits behind it, whatever that may be. So it does feel like the industry has kind of got their head around the fact that that is now something that everyone's going to have to do. And I think, which is difficult, because when you are so dedicated to, making a game that you really want, but it's struggling to get there, and you have to veer off to work for hire, whatever it is. I think that the main thing is just focusing on that sort of that revenue piece, keeping the lights on until we actually start to see some sort of pattern, because as I said, it's so up and down. There's no real trend to kind of, stick your hat on, so we can go, oh, it's like, well, now we're seeing like, 45% of games companies getting this sport, doing this. Now, maybe there's a way forward. There doesn't seem to be that at the moment. So I think, if there's opportunities to pitch for work for hire projects, again, not straightforward because again, there's, I think everyone's going to be doing that. But there's, as I said, there's a lot of talented people out there. So I think if the studios that are working on some of these larger games need that support, they're open. They are looking for that help. So yeah, it's just I think it's a good sign. It's a positive because people are sort of adapting, but it's going to be a bit of a slog.
Yeah, I think actually one of the things we will see more of is, it feels like at the moment there's quite a few early stage businesses that are trying to almost fill that need of like matching companies up with other companies to try and like find work opportunities. Yeah. So for example, on the like dev to publisher side, you've got companies like Pitchify and GameScout.biz that are setting up platforms in order to try and bring the folks that need the money and the folks that have the money together, because quite a lot of these conversations are often isolated to, a hotel meeting room at GDC, which isn't necessarily the most accessible way to go about funding. Certainly not the cheapest way to go about funding, given a flight to San Francisco. But I think we will start to see more of these kind of companies come to the fore to try and almost, make the most of what we've got, because there is funding out there. We've seen some of the VCs, particularly in the States, bring out new pots of money, which is great to see. But equally, we're not in the heydays of 5 to 6 years ago. So I always say to companies that are looking to grow or maybe starting out, look for those new, those contact channels or those contact points. I think back to your first point, Gavin, I'm interested to see what you, Isla and Phil, think on this. 24% uptick in UK companies starting game studios. I guess what would be your, talking about growing a game studio, if you're just starting out in this current climate, what are the key things you think they need to think about in each of our respective hats?
Oh, that's a tough question. My advice to anyone trying to do it is treat it like a business. Don't treat it like it's a hobby that I want to turn into like my, that pays the bills. Think of it like you want to run a business. You need to make money at the end of the day to keep the lights on. And if it's something that you love and you care about, then great. That's how I built what we do. I'm passionate and I love video games. I could never make one, but I've built a business around doing something in that space. And it might, back what I was saying earlier, where you get these studios that have to, unfortunately, put their first party thing on the side and just focus on co-dev to pay the bills. Sometimes that's the best way to start. If you've got a sustainable business that's making money, great, keep doing that because you're winning. If you're like, well, I want to make this game, this is our passion project, and before you've even really started, you're immediately looking for publishers and investors and help us. Like, there's so many other companies trying to do that. So my advice to anyone starting out is make sure you can fund yourself first. Make sure you've got a sustainable business. If you have to do some co-dev, great. As long as that's sustainable, then you can do anything else. But that's I see that as probably the most common thing that I see when we get approached by smaller studios that are just starting out and the game's still 2-3 years down the line and they've got no plans to make money until the game ships. And it's like, well, it's one of the first questions we ask them. It's like, how are you going to survive for the next 2 years?
And quite often that first payment from your game isn't coming out for another quarter at least anyway, right?
Yeah.
And even that point from release to that first payment can suddenly be a situation where games companies are like, oh, hang on a minute, I forgot I'm not getting paid for probably another 3 to 4 months.
Or if they've had to survive on investor money for the past 2 years until the game ships, that investor's going to want to be repaid. So their big bonanza payday is going to be pretty muted. Yeah. So do as much as you can yourself, build a sustainable business, I'd say.
I think the opportunities, I think, because these, on paper, a lot of these companies are startups, but if you look at the experience of the people behind them, it's not the same anymore. Like, it's not someone just going, oh, I fancy making a game today. They've already done some element of this, in their careers already. So the opportunities that is kind of going back to the stuff that they were really good at and actually, focusing on those areas, as Phil said, just kind of start building that revenue. But I don't think that means you're going backwards. I just think you're just utilising all the skills that you've already got to do that. And then obviously, as I said, over this however long period of time, opportunities will present themselves because you'll just be in different parts of networks. So if you're suddenly doing, a work for hire project for someone, that leads to this. It's a domino effect fundamentally within sort of broader networks. So I think that's where I do think the opportunities will be, because people aren't just startups. People are going, what do I do now? They've either been through it or they've seen enough already. I think so. I don't think it would be quite the same as before, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. If we want the industry to be sustainable and for a very long time, then I think all the lessons that we've all learned over the last sort of 5-6 years will come into play there. But yeah, I wish there was a magic wand that could solve most of those problems. But yeah, I think if you've got sort of the right people around you initially, just have those initial conversations just to make sure that on all areas, that we're not going to get everything right here either, even on what we're doing. But if we can help just point people in a direction or bring in someone else within that network that we already have, then again that just starts that ball rolling. So yeah, I think that's what I'd recommend to people as well.
Yeah, I think for sorry, Ali, you can join us.
I was just going to say to what the guy said. So you talked about you're starting a business, and I think your question was about the number of companies at Companies House, and decide what you want to do with that. So if you want to make games, you still have a business. So how is that business going to run? You don't have to do it. That's not a problem. But then make sure you do have someone that can help with that, or you outsource it to someone. There's lots of options. Nothing has to cost a fortune as well. Just find the right people to make sure your business is set up, because in my experience, if you don't and you cause yourself problems, it costs more money, it takes more of your time and creates bigger problems to undo those problems. So go for the easy win and just sort of set it up and try and make your life as pain-free as early on and into the future as possible. As I say, if you want to focus on making games, if that's where your strengths lie, find the right people, find the right team around you to help with the bits you don't want to do.
Yeah, completely. I think that's spot on. I think that's also a very practical way of looking at things as well, because ultimately you'd be amazed how many ways that, for example, like not setting a company up early enough and then transferring your IP in at a later date when it's valued at something, might have a capital gains tax, implication, or you decide to set up with a shareholder, but you've got no agreement or even understanding what happens if one of you leaves. Should that shareholder founder hand over the shares that they've already got, or should they be allowed to keep them because they've already built value in the business? So I think it's just about having conversations with people that have seen this before, whether it's an external advisor, whether it's someone you've brought in, whether it's even other founders that have maybe run a business before, right? I think it's absolutely a key point to be collaborating with people when you're thinking about setting up. And at least from my perspective, I think the other thing that I always say, particularly to early businesses when they're very, very early up in their journey, particularly ones that are starting off with a lot of work for hire work, is make sure you're trying to get paid a bit in advance and have like really good payment terms, because the amount of times we've seen startups get bitten, and it's really difficult when you're at that point in your journey, because ultimately you want to take any good work that you get, but we've seen clients agree to 90-day payment windows, and they're like, well, I actually would kind of need the money sooner rather than later to pay my people, or it turns out that company isn't actually particularly solvent that should be paying them, and now there's something at the back of the queue waiting to be paid, or they've just agreed to have it all paid on delivery, which again is not uncommon, but if you can get some paid in advance, that's great. We had one client actually, which I thought was quite smart, asked the client who they were about to start work for if they would introduce them to someone else that worked for them before, just so they could chat about their experience. And they kind of said that they got one response, which was, no, we're not introducing you to anyone that has worked with us previously. And others were like, yeah, sure, you can introduce loads of folks we've worked with before. And you can kind of guess which one had the better experience than the other. You've got to word it carefully, right? But you also want to try and get some of those telltale signs out early if you know this is going to be a problematic company to work for, and it's ultimately not going to help you keep the lights on obviously it's not great to not get that work, but if you're going to do the work and not get paid for it, then that's 10 times worse, right? You would rather invest your time and money in somewhere else. So I think we've talked a bit about starting up in the current climate. Not to put a doom and gloom on it again, but any tips what you would do if you were having a game studio that's struggling right now? What are the things to kind of focus on and do in order to kind of get to whatever it's survive till 25? What's the 2026 version of that now?
Yeah, I think actually, well, it's probably best everyone just kind of stops thinking like year on year as well at the moment, because I think just because another year something starts, problems don't just miraculously solve themselves. So I think, as Phil said, I think if you're treating this just like a business, then actually you're going day to day, which I think even when it's going well, people are still thinking like that, because you don't know when something could take a shift that's going to suddenly, cause you some issues. So if you're struggling, the best thing to say is talk, even everything at a bank that I do, if something was going wrong and I buried my head in the sand, it's just going to get 10 times worse, months down the line. So, there are, I think that, again, I'd like to think that the industry knows now that there are people that are willing to sort of listen. And I said, I definitely don't have all the answers, but I might have other people that do have the answers. So there are sounding boards out there that people that just kind of say, look, just sort of lay it on us, because we're not we're not creators. But so it's like simple, of course, we can't help people make a game, but we can sort of listen to everything that's kind of is a concern for them, and say, okay, so who else can I bring to the table to have that discussion? And I think I wish there was more out there. I worked with a handful of them, sort of consultants within the industry, and their sort of background and knowledge and everything and experience is invaluable. I've seen it so many times with the ones that I work with. So it's a shame, given us, regardless of all the issues, the industry's still big and there's still a lot of companies, so there's fortunately not enough people to, to offer those kind of services to that many companies. However, but when you're getting to a certain point, or, and especially when you're struggling, I think if you could potentially end up making a decision that looks great now, but say on a legal perspective, a year down the line could end up not being great. So still just make sure you're you're checking in with all your touch points on those on sort of contracts or anything on those big decisions, because the worst that you can do is rush into things now just because things aren't going that great, just to get something over the line, because it might only be a very good fix for 6 months, rather than actually if you structure something slightly differently, it might just kind of see you through a few more stages. So, that's kind of what I'd say. And I've got the privilege of working with a lot of game studios, and I do think that is having those conversations is something that I enjoy, because it means that I want to try and actually help and add some value. So the more that the trusted people you have around you, the more that they know, the better. Just because at least then you don't feel like you're doing it all on your own, and there is actually help out there.
Yeah, I'd say if the studio is trying to manage a reduction in size. So everyone's talking about how to grow your studio, but there's very little information on how to shrink your studio.
That's like the obvious, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, this is pretty doom and gloom, but if you are going to be laying off staff, do it in the right way. You can't just do like a company-wide Zoom, say, right, 20% of the staff. Do it in the right way. Get advice on it. Make sure you do it compliantly, and consider the people as well as much as possible. We've seen quite a few insurance claims for employment tribunals, and it's messy. And
it's reputational as well. I think if you've got a good company, I think people. Yeah. And I do think a lot of people are trying to do it the best way they can. I don't think there is a right way of doing it, if I'm honest. But I mean, you could do it in, as Phil said, just make sure you're having those conversations with, someone who can just maybe guide you in the best way of doing it. Because if you've got some existing IP, you've got a reputation in the industry, you want to be able to keep that as strong as you can, whilst having to go through those difficult decisions. So just sanity check yourself at that point.
Yeah. One of the first things we'll do when we're looking at companies is we'll type in the name into Google and click news, and see if there's any sort of horror stories in there. We genuinely do that,
Yeah.
and it's never great to see the studios like, oh, so and so like layoffs and all this drama, and it's it's usually because they've done it the wrong way. So don't knee-jerk those things. Take time to assess it and get good advice. Don't be afraid of getting good advice, especially if you're struggling and you're worried about paying the bills. And you're like, well, do I want to pay a consultant to help me with this? And you're like, well, I can't afford that. But sometimes that's the best money you'll ever spend. That sounds like a plug. I don't do that kind of consulting. It's not me.
There are great games
but
over
there are.
consultants.
It's all for free.
But yeah, get advice. Get advice on this kind of stuff. That's what these companies are here for.
I think as well, it's to your point exactly, to shrink a company is not a quick thing. So if you bury your head in the sand about the problems are probably going to get bigger. So then they'll be harder to resolve. But also, you're just gaining more time that if you put that energy into addressing the problem will be sooner resolved. And to do the things you guys just mentioned, to do that in the best way possible, that does tend to take time. You don't want to be in a position where you're having to, or feeling like you have to make knee-jerk reactions. That's probably not going to end up with the best outcome 10 times out of 10. So acknowledging the problem, speaking to people that can help, at least to just start thinking about it and making sure where you end up in that end position is where you want to end up. Because as I say, that probably will take a bit of time.
Yeah, and I think I would always say for companies that want to lay people off in the right way but don't know where to start, always would recommend going to the ACAS website. First and foremost, it's free. There's folks you can ring them, they will give you pointers about how to manage any sort of redundancy. And we've had clients that have almost kind of gone to ACAS and sort of almost self-served, working out what they think the redundancy process is going to be, and either checked it with a consultant who knows about this, or come to like our employment team and go, can you just sense check this, which is obviously going to be far quicker and easier and cheaper than trying to get end-to-end advice from any external advisor. I'd also say the same conversely for one of the areas where we've seen actually more issues is where companies have hired someone and had them on probation, and then maybe if this person's had a 3-month probation, maybe like 2 days before their probation is due to lapse, gone, we actually really don't want to keep this person. And you go, well, have you told them that you're not happy about where things are, or that you could they could improve in some ways? No, we've not told them that at all. And in theory, again, it's not super difficult to get rid of someone at that stage in their career, but it's a really bad way to burn bridges with people really early on in your company. And I think to your point, from a reputational perspective, it's not great if you're not thinking about this stuff and having clear dialogues with your staff and your advisors early on when you're hiring people or getting rid of people. There's things to think about on both ends. So we've talked a bit about struggling companies. How do you build on success from the success stories you've seen? I think all of us have seen in the past year, at least personally for me, when I've been at some of the conferences in the last few months, it feels like the highs are high and the lows are low at the moment. Obviously the lows are not great, but we're talking here about growing. So what are some growth tips that you guys have got up your sleeves?
Yeah, I mean, it's the only time I probably sound like an actual banker at this point, but I think if things are going well, then it's kind of, you've still got to take stock of what you've got going on. So that there's still certain things you've got to be careful of. You don't want to start taking, say, losses on, let's say you've just got another big contract, you're getting paid in a certain currency. You don't want to start taking like big FX losses, or you don't want to start just having money sitting there doing nothing when actually you could be, I say the interest rates aren't going to stick around forever, but if you earn some good money on what you're holding and credit interest on what you're holding, if you're my clients about it, and that money across a year could pay for a couple of people's salary, and it's low risk, it's sitting there, it's just earning some interest. But while things are the way they are, though, from my perspective, obviously that's kind of what I've talked to my clients about, and then obviously people then are going to want to start to evolve maybe what the business is doing. So so it still comes back to the network piece and introductions. So there's sort of 3 sort of key areas where I can sort of personally support companies within in that stage. But yeah, the worst thing you want to do is you've done all that hard work and then you're just don't get too complacent. You know, you're losing money here, you're losing money there, because it all adds up over a year. And especially at the moment, that if you're getting paid anything in dollars, it's not a good time, because obviously, you know, certain individuals keep speaking, and obviously it's causing, it's so volatile at the moment. I mean, you know, we have a fantastic treasury team and foreign exchange team at the bank, but yeah, it's really difficult to pinpoint what the hell's going on next.
We're working hard at the moment.
Yes, exactly. And it's so, you know, we can only kind of focus on what we can do on, you know, as a bank. So, you know, looking at those sort of, all your costs are in sterling, but you're getting a lot of money in dollars. Yes, the rate's not good, but you want to get sort of the lowest margin. You want to get the lowest cost base to yourselves at that point, because we're getting the most for your money. So there's still an element of control what we have. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff outside of our control at the moment, which is not helping, because, you know, we're just kind of all sitting there watching the news, just kind of going, okay, what next? And so all those, so even if you're, you know, things are going well, there's still enough volatility out there in the broader markets to kind of, you've got to keep on your toes, just because you don't know what's going to happen next. So yeah, I think that's obviously very specific to what I'm doing. But I still, you know, the same principle applies whether it's a low point or a high point. You're still going to want to have the same conversations that we've probably already said.
I mean, I'd say if you've been successful, then congrats. If it's your IP, if it's first party IP, then there's so much potential value in that. And what we've seen is that the value of the IP is kind of flipped. It used to be that, you know, Hollywood would make a movie and then someone would make a game based on that movie, and there'd be, you know, movie time games. But now it's the other way around. Now we're seeing more and more movies and TV series that are based on video games. We just had Minecraft that came. Is it out now?
It's out. It's out there.
It's out.
Yeah.
And there's heaps of movies and stuff being made on gaming IP. There's so much value in it. So if you've got a successful IP, there's potentially a lot more money to be made than just, you know, selling it on Steam. And also make sure it's on all the other stores as well. If you can port it to mobile as well. You know, don't sleep on that, because someone else will do it first.
Someone else is probably already doing it first.
Yeah, that's a whole other thing. But we've seen a bit of that, definitely. So yeah, you know, there's more ways to make money out of your IP than just the game itself. Merch is a big thing, especially in Roblox. We've seen quite a few, couple of our clients that are doing a hell of a lot of merch, because it's great audiences. You know, young people, they want plushies, toys, stuff like that. And Roblox takes their slice of the action, but not in the merch, because you own the IP. So Roblox is trying to do its own thing now for merch, but that brings with it a whole other risk. If you're making like a board game of your game, it's physical stuff. So if it's a client of ours, we're asking them things like, well, you know, has it been like tested that it's safe and it's not going to put someone's eye out, sort of question. And it sounds
some plushie.
Yeah, I mean, genuinely, like it's those kind of things that we have to ask. And if it's a plushie, it's like, well, who designed it? And if it's designed on a game character that's got like a unicorn, right? It's got a big spiky horn on the front. Like someone's going to have an eye out with that. And I know it sounds silly, but it's true. It's a numbers game. Eventually, someone's going to have an eye out. So we're asking them, like, who designed it? Who signed off on that? Who's making it? What sort of rights of recourse are there from your supplier? If you're using like a complete third-party fulfillment company, and there are companies out there that will do that, where you say, here's my IP, go and merch it for me, and they'll just do everything, and they'll design it and make sure it's compliant. They might even take on the insurance, that can unlock a whole other revenue stream for you. And then you get things, go and talk to Netflix, and that's where stuff like GDC can be really valuable if you're getting the right meetings with the right people. But
it is tough. I think the TV film games are all massive in their own right. They're not that connected, if I'm honest. I think I've tried to do a sort of spider's web of kind of, you know, how I connect, and it just got out of control. So, you know, it'd be handy if there was just kind of a dedicated space to kind of, similar to, I guess, what we were talking about earlier, about bringing sort of, you know, whether
People together.
Yeah, people together. But because I think in reality, like the other creative industries have been, you know, just games isn't, you know, where it is at the moment. I don't think that the other subsectors are doing any better. It's pretty tough across all creative at the moment. Fundamentally, it's just, you know, where is the money being spent? And, you know, the advertisers and brands have still got the power here, because it seems to be wherever they want to put their money is, you know, obviously it's more relatable to some of the other industries, but that's kind of, you know, where we're seeing some growth. But yeah, I think that we're lucky at Aburthnot. We've got a team of 30 people in the media team, all with our own network across all those sectors. So, you know, if we feel like it's the right connection, we will do it. And because I think most people are always happy to have that initial conversation. So if you've got IP and you're looking for, you know, a production company, or I had a company I used to work with, and, you know, they've been doing children's TV content for a long time. I wanted to start thinking about, can they turn that into something for Roblox? And I working with a Roblox developer. He was happy to have, you know, he's happy to have that conversation. So it might not lead anywhere, but, you know, you've got two people on different ends, kind of just talking to each other, hoping there'll be a learn for both people, and it kind of gives them a way forward. So I think that's, even though I'd like to think that the sort of the making sort of more of your IP would be a lot easier, I think that, you know, maybe that's something I'll discuss with Ukie at some point. Create a database, but, you know, for the time being, that we've all got sort of, I said, our own sort of network with across all those sectors. So hopefully there's something we can do there.
I think, sorry, I was going to say, I do think the sort of IP part of it it's been a talking point across all creative sectors in the past couple of years, quite a lot. And I think, to Phil's point, it is the bit that sort of transcends and crosses. I guess is probably much more your bag than mine. That what if your IP is your asset, what are you willing to do with that? So some of these deals can be a lot of money, but you are giving it away in its entirety. Are you not? But you're taking on some of the risk and part of that revenue stream that comes back from it. Are you giving it away in its entirety, but if it recoups, you have the option to repurchase? There's options out there, and I think sometimes it can feel or be too appealing for the offers to come in, and you're giving away everything you've worked for in terms of any sort of retention of it, but it seems like it's worth it. And it might be. I'm not the person to make that call, but making sure you are speaking to the right people, your legal contracts tied to exactly what you expect out of it. I'm sure you've seen it a little.
Yeah, I think your point actually more generally from a business perspective about trying to not take the first offer that comes through the door. I think we get clients that will get, for example, emails to their general email address, maybe in their terms of service, and they'll be like, oh, hey, I'm from X agency, or I'm from X place. We would love to have your X IP to, you know, make it into a TV series. And you think, God, that sounds fantastic. This person's going to solve all my problems. But if someone's emailing you out of the blue to do that, they look like they're a legit body. Yes, have that conversation. But equally, that means, okay, there's clearly some appeal here. Maybe I should be now broadening my net if this is something of interest to me, and actually start having more conversations. Like, do I know any other studios that have gone through this particular kind of deal before? What have their experiences been? I guess just more broadly on IP, the two things I would say if you're successful you should be thinking about is A, look to bolster your IP protection if you haven't already. Again, IP is a very strong theme here. But it's very easy to park a lot of stuff we talk about when you're growing, and that's completely understandable. You know, whenever we work with new clients, I'm never going to expect them to be absolutely, you know, bootstrapped up to the nines from a legal perspective when they come through the door. But if you're successful, we can tackle things on a kind of bit by bit basis that isn't going to be overwhelming, that, you know, you'll be thankful that you did in a couple of years when you've got even less time, or however things pan out. The other thing that I've been seeing a lot more recently, particularly in the last couple of years, I'd say is, and I think this is relevant really for companies that are A, looking to grow, but also successful ones, even struggling ones to be quite frank, is back catalogue management. There are now quite often at indie publishers dedicated folks to look after the back catalogue of games that have come prior, and even some of the bigger developers that, particularly ones that are self-publishing, are very much looking at the existing games and the existing IP that they've already got under their belt and going, okay, well, how can we actually make more of this? And actually nowadays, if we've got a dev that is signing a publishing agreement, it's very easy to focus on launch day, day one, and maybe like what support looks like for the next 6 to 12 months. And maybe neither party wants to commit beyond that, because who knows how successful the game is going to be. But if you're signing a publishing agreement that is normally 5 to 10 years long, to be honest, that's normally what we tend to see, what is that publisher got in their back pocket going forwards to offer you basically the thing that makes worth staying with that publisher in the long term, right? What you don't want is them to get bored of your game after 3 years and move on to the next big thing and let your game waste away, right? You want to have the ability to exit, or for the ability to understand that they're going to sort of have marketing and other things like that. Was that a question from me? Was that you putting your hand up here? Sorry.
No, I was just touching my hat.
Oh, sorry.
We do have a couple of questions.
To be fair, we're probably getting to about question time, to be honest, and anyone's got any.
But do carry on. I didn't want to interrupt there.
I think that's my main 2 points, to be honest. Basically, try and get your house in order if you're successful. You're never going to have everything in order. If you have got everything in order, then you're exactly the kind of client that makes my life at least very much easier. And then, look to see what you've already got in your locker. As the folks have said, there are things like merch opportunities, film opportunities, etc. That may or may not be a big breadwinner for you. Sometimes it's just brand value that folks do that for, right? It's just increased brand exposure. But actually, what is the thing that at its core is making the money for you? And is there any way you can make that money work harder, whether it be through bank or just getting new sales out there? I was going to ask about, what we kind of see, what we predict for the next few years, but maybe we should do that right at the end after some questions.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of those questions sort of reflect the future, I suppose. Yeah, I mean, we had one sort of early on about new sort of labour legislation on workers' rights, particularly affecting sort of full-time employees. I think we sort of covered a little bit of this much earlier on, but I mean, obviously, earlier on we were thinking about how companies can be agile and adapt and change and shrink and grow depending on sort of needs. I hope I've asked that question helpfully. Employing full-time, perhaps.
Yeah.
If maybe you're seeing trends for people with, different types of contracts, perhaps.
Yeah. So I don't think the new labour legislation, although forgive me, I'm not an employment lawyer, so I don't have all the ins and outs of it, but I don't think any of the stuff we've said before really falls away just because of the new legislation. But I think obviously it's just more stuff to be mindful of. I wouldn't be completely surprised if we started in the video game sector, not moving towards a film and TV model a bit more, but that is an industry that is very much built on kind of project-based teams, whether that's, fixed term employees or contractors or agencies that have folks under them that are working on many different productions at the same time. I guess a little bit like a work for hire studio, maybe in the games world. And in particular, I think there's a slight push at the moment towards having, I think you made this point earlier, Gav, much leaner core teams in places that have a very big development heritage, like the UK or the US or other parts of mainland Europe. Very experienced senior folks, but then having much smaller, agile development teams around them, possibly in the UK, but possibly elsewhere, right? I think, again, in this kind of post-COVID world, there's more flexibility from that perspective. My only caveat would be, I think one of the things that has been a recurring pain point in the last couple of years for multiple clients is how do you hire people remotely, particularly on a long-term basis? Because there's a lot of companies, you might have heard of them, employees of record popping up that sell you the world, but I'm not entirely sure, entirely fully compliant from a tax or legal perspective in the companies they operate in. So I would always say, speak to a salesperson at these places, but maybe speak to your accountants in particular and your insurance and your knowledge about engaging these companies.
There's a lot of trust that has to go both ways when you're trying to hire someone from thousands of miles away.
Yeah.
It goes both ways. I guess, so it's it's interesting. Basically, you say comparing it to sort of TV film model. I mean, I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. I mean, there's definitely things that TV and film are struggling with at the moment, but I do feel like because of they've had these pinch points a lot well, a lot of times before, I guess, games may have done, that, you know, they've had to learn how to be agile and lean and do it that way. So it's not, I don't think that's the worst thing to do. And the main thing is how do you get your content made and out there in the best way? If that's the best way, then that's just where the industry is going to shift. And I think, you know, if you're holding onto IP in the games as well, potentially your margins might be, you know, could be higher than TV and film anyway. You know, so you know, as a business owner, there's going to be hopefully some added benefit to you there. But yeah, I know I said it's kind of that's going to take a while to sort of sink in, I think, for a lot of the industry, just because, you know, how many people, especially with the broader economy, want to be living on contract to contract? Not that many, you know. So but then some people enjoy it as well. So I don't know. It's, you know, it's not as straightforward anymore. But I think for the overall industry of where we are now, that's probably going to have to be the, you know, how it's going to have to be structured for the foreseeable, especially for a lot of the new companies coming through.
I think when you said earlier about, you know, this assumption that sort of creative industries all operate fairly similarly, my first thought was that is exactly the biggest sort of fundamental difference. They operate in very different ways in terms of how they staff up, create a project and move on to the next thing. And I have wondered, especially with what the games industry has gone through in recent years, would that shift happen? And it might, and I can see loads of pros for it, but it is a complete sort of change and shift. How do you train people? How do you entice sort of those lower level people? Where do they learn from? And with a film or TV, you tend to have sort of lower staffing or more vendor contracts, especially at the post end with like a heavy shoot. Whereas with video games, you have sort of bigger, more consistent teams, quite often for longer periods. And if it's successful, you want support, you want to you know, keep developing. And there's not just a will be delivered now and now we move on. So I'm not sure how those things merge.
Because you want to keep the talent, don't you?
Yeah, and people do, and the sort of investment studios have made into their talent, they want to reap onto the next, you know, and they want to build a team around them. So I can see the argument from both sides. So to your question, I'm not actually sure where it ends up, but there's definitely sort of some question marks around it.
I think your point are actually spot on around the kind of longer periods, because I think when we think of a lot of series or films, like I say, the shooting period may be a matter of months, right? Maybe up to a year, but actually for a lot of games development, that's like potentially years.
Yeah.
And again, with a kind of employment law sort of hat on, a lot of employment rights can trigger after a 2-year period. Even if you're saying they're a contractor, if in fact they're not really a contractor, then HMRC or any other, you know, employment body is going to go, oh, hang on a minute, you know, why weren't you giving them paid holiday, sick pay, all the rest of it? So it's, in a sense, the kind of existing model doesn't really, it's not very flexible either way to just kind of move over straight over to the film and TV style model, but can it stay as it is or has been historically?
I'm sure there'll be a hybrid version somewhere in between that would hopefully work.
Games industry just always innovating on all
exactly.
fronts.
It's often sort of, I feel like there's some reticence around the film and TV model with games, but the way I see it, well, maybe speaking personally is the wrong thing here, but it doesn't have to be an either-or situation.
True.
These ecosystems can exist within a bigger ecosystem. So yeah. Okay, fantastic. Well, we've got a couple more questions here, and I should say for anyone in the room with us, if you do have a question, do speak up. So we were talking earlier about sort of diversification and merch and everything. The question has arisen around purchasing power of customers, consumers. Obviously, we're seeing quite expensive games coming out. We might have GTA 6, I don't know, potentially breaching the 3-digit mark. I don't know. Have you sort of looked into any of the consumer side of things at all in terms of what might be possible in terms of sort of people's appetite, capacity to buy these maybe some of the merch side?
I don't know, it's come up a few times recently actually, because I just had a conversation with a client today, and every time I ask, oh, so when are you looking to release that game? They go, well, it depends on when they're releasing GTA 6, you know, because there's going to be a lot of, in reality, if you do, I think you're right, I think you probably will. Maybe not on the standard offering, but, obviously now when you're buying anything, on PlayStation, Xbox, there is standard package, then you've got like the pimped up package, that comes with it.
Official title.
Exactly. And then suddenly you get to, you probably will get over that 100 mark potentially. So it's, the difficulty is, I know there's been a lot of talk about, obviously the release of GTA 6 in terms of hopefully some positivity that trickles down in terms of gets people maybe invested or gets people excited again about the games industry. But obviously the downside from a financial point of view, again just going back to the wider economy, is that if you've just spent say £100 on a game, in reality when are you going to buy the next one? I mean, so if you're a hardcore gamer, you might just go full out and play that, for 3 to 6 months and just do what you need to do. But then you still might go, well, I still can't afford, but then, it might then lead to opportunities for some of the games on Steam. So, there's some smaller indie studios that are going, well, my game's only 20 quid, but it's really, it's really addictive, it's really fun. So it's not going to be easier because everyone's kind of looking at what everyone else is doing to try and figure out, well, when's the best time to release. Because you've got to be quite strategic about that, because unfortunately the broader economy and everyone's willingness to spend, it's got to play a part. Are you going to spend that much money on that, or are you going to go, actually, I'm going to put that aside this month and actually I'm going to go, I don't know, whatever, just going to hang out with mates or I'm going to say for a holiday, or I don't know, whatever it may be. So of course it'll play a part. The one thing the game industry has is a lot of loyal sort of gamers. So will it hit the numbers maybe that we've seen in the past? Maybe not, but they're still going to attract a lot of people in. I mean, I say every time I have a child, don't buy it. You haven't got time. I still buy it anyway because you says at some point you will have time, and then you kind of want it. You want it there, ready to go. So I think the excitement and the pool that sort of the industry has will always sort of play a part. So, yeah, I think it's going to come down to timing, very much so, in terms of when people are looking to release at the moment.
Especially if you've got things like Oblivion remastered coming out, and you want to launch your game, and now you're competing with games that have been around forever and they're being re-released as well. So there's so much choice out there for people on what they want to spend their money on. So getting the pricing just right is, don't just assume that if you price it higher you'll make more money. I think Vampire Survivors was one that came out and it was quite cheap, and so I looked at it and I was like, I'll have a punt on that, and I loved it. Whereas if it was 20 quid, I'd be like, I'll stick it on the wish list and wait and see for a sale. And my wish list is basically my Steam now. It's just whenever stuff comes up on sale, I'll have a punt on it. And it's only the big ticket stuff that I really want that I'll pay full price for. And I don't think I'm that unusual in that respect.
No. I think it's tricky because actually a game like Grand Theft Auto 6, given the scale of the teams and probably the marketing budget, it being over $100 or 100 quid shouldn't really be unexpected. And I think there was actually quite an interesting chain on this morning in the UK GI Slack, saying that ultimately games haven't really gone up with inflation at all, really since the mid-80s. So I think, a $40 game back then would probably be around $80 odd now. But yet still gamers, are probably speaking very generally, are quite a vocal community, right? But actually I think very few consumers understand that actually games are probably bang for buck, can be one of the cheapest mediums out there. I think in terms of the question specifically about merch, I think we always say to clients, if you can do a small initial run when it comes to merch, because what you don't want is what we would see about 15, 20 years ago, where you would go into every single HMV and there'd just be a basket of Angry Birds by the door for sale, because they've obviously made no Santa to Brovio. But back then people would get into merch deals and make obscene amounts of plushies or whatever run they were doing, and they just wouldn't be able to shift them. And also think about, what is the purchasing power of your particular audience? Gamers generally do tend to be on the higher end of purchasing power, which is great for us as a general sector. But is your client base more likely to spend £5 on a plushy keyring, or are they after that 300 quid limited editions resin statue that is going to get shipped from halfway across the world? I think it's just you have to ideally speak to your audience and understand what it is they want. B, see if there's any good community creators out there that you can leverage. I think sites like Fangamer have got hugely popular now, because that's a way to get fan content that is clearly probably doing very well on unofficial sites already if it's being sold. And then see, as I say, kind of just, maybe do a small initial run so you're not, which might increase costs slightly at the start, but ultimately means that you're not flooding the market with merch that people don't want, basically, or is at the wrong price point.
Well, there's trends that can be set, right? And I think, looking at sort of the content creator market, again, if you're just doing some trial and error, are they going to sit on are they going to, if you're working with a sort of company that uses influencers, are they going to do you then put it on the, if they've got enough people watching already, you've got a bit of merch on the try, and then suddenly it's something, suddenly sitting there in front of the screen, people will come and go, what's that? Where'd you get that from? What's going on there? So there are different ways, as you said, that you can sort of trial these things before going too crazy. But the nice thing about the game is you've got so much more access to the players than I think you've ever had before. Something that maybe sort of TV and film, when you usually hear about sort of Ofcom complaints or something, if there's an issue there, so not as accessible for them. But I think utilise all those available channels. I think at this point.
Sorry, I think this has been touched on a little bit in discussion around competition for time or competition for cost, and games not wanting to spend very much on their games. Have you heard of any novel approaches to discoverability, like trying to find more interesting ways of getting out there, and especially with something like Oblivion dropping almost out of the blue? If you'd scheduled something and you were hoping to get a good amount of coverage in the last week, you've probably been deprived of that across a lot of different channels. But have you seen anything interesting in how people have approached getting their games out there?
So I think one of the things I think has just been generally quite interesting over the last 3 or 4 years, and I think Simon Carles from Game Discover Pros probably talked about this the most, but Steam wishlist used to be like a very, very reliable indicator of how well your game was going to do, but that's actually really fallen off in recent years. And actually, pretty much since that point, particularly in the indie game space, companies have started to get more creative about things like discoverability or community building. So, the obvious one being Discord. I think that's one of the things that indie publishers are really focused on, is really starting that Discord community early, really curating and really having that direct player feedback and discussion, particularly if you're going for things like early access, because you really want to understand at granular level what players want to see. I think the Oblivion example is quite interesting because despite that, the games that have done well in the last week or so, things like Claire Obscura, have just done well because they've just been so well reviewed. But there's also been other interesting buzz stories around those particular titles. So I think Claire Obscura is apparently been made by 30 people, even though that's not entirely true. So there were articles going, it was made by 30 people, and then there was an article a couple days later, it wasn't entirely made by 30 people, but it's just about finding those, A, finding your community early and finding them in the spaces that they should be, but B, also, what story do you have to tell around your game on launch? Obviously, being well reviewed is going to help regardless. Blueprints, Claire Obscura, just stuff in the last couple of weeks, right? Incredibly well reviewed games, but they've each of them got really interesting stories behind the studios or behind the game that have been little extra touch points that have kept, I think, those games in particular kind of above the parapet of the noise generally. But I totally agree. There's more and more games coming out on Steam every year. Doing SEO on mobile is an absolute nightmare. That's a dark art, I think, actually, that particular role. So I don't envy people trying to release a game at the moment, but those are the kind of key things I guess I'm seeing.
I think with games like Oblivion, where there's already such a following, I guess they can afford to kind of go, I'm going to surprise our fans because they won't be expecting it, but then that'll just cause a frenzy in itself. But
and it was on the anniversary as well, wasn't it? Right?
Yeah, so you never know. They might have done, well, maybe people expect something, but but then maybe people just sitting there waiting on that day going, oh God, what's going to happen? And but you've already got a following. They're going to do your job for you, because once you've made that release, everyone's just going to go online and shout about it. So you basically like free marketing at that point, because they're just going to do, they're going to tell everyone about it anyway. The discoverability thing came again last year, because I can't remember how many games was released on Steam last year. It was a crazy number.
I want to say 15,000.
Yeah, something like that. And I think it was like 12 to 15,000 or something. And I think that people are trying to think, maybe look elsewhere. It's not just about publishers. It's not just about, but then you've got more traditional PR companies that are just focused on games. You've got the sort of the influencer market, which is kind of taking a bit of a shift at the moment. I think, only because the industry itself seems to be shifting. I think there's some really core sort of influencers out there who will just play one game and have started out like, I've forgotten TDM even plays Minecraft again. That's been his world for such a long time. I think he was involved in some shape or form in the film. He was invited to do some of the PR for that. So yeah, there is still an element of that, but even that industry is shifting. So that's not even nothing is the set answer. I think if you've got, you need to be having multiple conversations with different people, because it's going to come down to what your game is, the type of game you've got. What you think, who's your audience, and who's going to, if it's more of a, child, if it's more for a certain age group, then actually you want to go towards an influencer who does a lot around, that targets that age group, so, again, there's no one answer, unfortunately, but I think at least there are more options than there used to be. I don't think we're just kind of stuck to the same, well, we have to just wait until someone comes knocking. Similar in the TV market, I think, you're not just going to sit outside BBC or RTV studios and go, hopefully they want to come take it. There are other options now because of obviously the streaming models, because of, broader distribution agreements, that might come into play. So if people are not just kind of going down the same route every single time, it's just, it's going to just depend on, the game, target audience, and where you're at in your business as well. So,
well, there's I was going to say I saw something interesting recently. There's a YouTube channel called Viva la Dirt League, which I think they're Australian, they just make comedy skits about gaming and stuff. But they've like teamed up with a studio and they're making a game. Not just where they're promoting the game, but they're in the game. Their characters are in the game. It's a fishing game, and it looks cool. But I think if they hadn't been involved, it probably just would have gone on to Steam and never got seen. But it's an interesting way to approach it, because rather than just being a streamer trying to like plug the game, they're actually in it. They're involved in it. Obviously some interesting business deals were done, but I thought that was quite a cool thing. So they've got such a following already, so immediately there's loads of buzz and people, this looks cool and stuff. So they've really gone in hard with the
I think they want to be more involved actually, which is nice. Because they're not just, it's easy to say, sure, I'll just talk about your game on my channel and see what happens. But if they're actually more engaged with it, then hopefully the studio will get the most benefit, because if they're more engaged, then hopefully the audience will also be more engaged with that. So again, that's kind of where I'm seeing that shift. I think, because they're thinking about them as a business, they're not just some person sitting in front of a camera and just doing some, hoping people will watch. They're looking at their own brand, they're looking at their own business opportunities, and actually, so now, I think it's not a bad time to be sort of looking at that market just because they want to be more involved, I think, at this point.
I think what you said earlier, in terms of the games industry has a very vocal community, and you need a community to be vocal. So how do you build that community in the first instance? If you've got sort of hopefully not, but say like a bang average game, people aren't going out and talking about it. But if you have a small core group, either from those early access stages, or maybe it's got a bit of traction after you've done your release, and there's more, to Gav's point, yes, you compare it to other creative industries, it's kind of all or nothing. Whereas with the games market, we're very fortunate that there are entry points that are easier for people, but you need a core community to sort of build it up from there. Like what you said earlier in terms of those surprise things, people are definitely trying different things, and that is going to work, but you need something good that people are going to talk about, and you just need a few to sort of start that. You've got to start somewhere, I think.
Yeah, and I think that to your point and talking about influencers more broadly, I think that's why a lot of studios nowadays do look at micro influencers first to actually promote their game, which could be an influencer that's got maybe only a few thousand followers, but that, if that's very targeted to the audience you want, then that can be a very cost-effective way of actually, as you say, starting that momentum. And I think actually that's just generally one trend that I've seen more in the last few years, is that influencers definitely expect to be paid now. There's no freebies anymore in this world, so make sure you've got some budget for that, because
the successful ones might do.
Yeah, well, you say that, but I feel like everyone's got their price nowadays on TikTok or YouTube, whatever it is. And I've had a few clients going, I could just give them a key and they just crack on with it. But it doesn't feel like it does still happen, but it's fewer and further between now.
But then if they're going to give you more, then it might be money lost.
Yeah,
spending,
indeed.
I think. But yeah, we'll see.
No, that's really, really good. Lots of thoughts there. I think there's just so many avenues to go down, and ultimately, we might look at these instances and not necessarily understand that an awful lot of thought and work and research has gone into some of these strategies, and some of them might have failed, and we have no idea that they've done this. So yeah, all food for thought. Right, we've got quite an interesting question here. So someone has a bit of more of a television background, TV background, owns their own IP, but keen to sort of progress into games. Interested in understanding a little bit more about how, what kind of person would fit that bill. So bringing in someone to help with getting their existing IP that's in sort of film and TV made into a game, basically.
Is it looking to someone to hire to
Yeah,
come on board?
I mean, where would you sort of potentially start looking? Would you, perhaps talk to a recruiter?
Yeah.
I would just go straight to again ask someone and say who's maybe already done that, or or say like someone comes to me like Gavin with TV, like as I said, I gave the example earlier of someone who did children's TV content, connected with a Roblox developer. Better to just have that conversation with someone who's already doing it, just because they ideally someone who's there's at least a bit of synergy then in terms of like the IP, so you can at least make it a bit more targeted. We'd want to just give them a vague idea before they start to spend too much money or hire someone to come and do that, start paying when actually they go, well, I didn't think about this and this first. So yeah, I think if you could speak to a game studio that is kind of aligned with maybe some of the the IP and or at least just give you some hints and tips first, and then sort of maybe start to go out from there.
Yeah, I think as well, it might be worth sort of talking to the publishers themselves as well, getting their feedback, so you can sort of essentially improve what you're pitching. Essentially,
but just understanding, is there appetite for that IP, and then that's a $1 million question for everyone. What's the appetite?
There might be some studios out there that have got an existing game that's kind of cool but missing a little bit of X factor.
Yeah, sure.
And then with this IP, suddenly it's interesting. So I've seen a few games that are okay, but then they've got a well-known IP, and suddenly they've got a big audience. Mm-hmm. So there could be some studios out there that are just looking for that missing X factor, and it could be a really good connection where their game is like all right, but with a bit of celebrity factor or whatever the IP is, it can really shoot off. So that could be a way of doing it.
Yeah, I think it's thinking about it as well. What do you want to do with the IP, and then going down that route. So, and also what is their personal involvement that they want to keep, and then trying to find the right road from there, and being quite clear from the outset. Because as you said, there's options, especially if you've got both sides, and I think Gav's point of there are people that have done similar, speak to them.
I'd say have a look to see who at the various games conferences in the last couple of years has spoken on a panel either on transmedia or licensed IP, because you see quite a lot of the same faces pop up, and there are some games companies that have done a lot of this that might be willing to lend you an ear. And it's one of those things where people have very different experiences depending on their IP and their audience and what relationship, and whether it's licensee to licensor. There are also definitely consultants out there that do a lot of license-based work. So I think I'll give a shout out to Jeff at Hairy Moose, because I know he does a lot of this stuff in the UK, working with licensors and licensees and trying to find, I think predominantly in the game space, but I think finding the folks out there that either have a biz dev or licensing or a strategic partnership background, who are either on their own, doing their own thing, or are perhaps moved between a few companies, would be people to speak to. Not necessarily saying you're going to be able to get them on board, but I think start having those conversations and finding out who are the voices in the sector, and drop a few LinkedIn messages and see who you can dig up.
That's good. Last question then. It's quite an interesting one actually. It's from someone in higher education, a lecturer across multiple games courses. Notice there's a sort of consistent talk of bridging gaps and the idea of indie being sort of the way forwards for, I assume, students. They're interested in understanding a little bit more about creating a non-profit game studio. Obviously, we see an awful lot of games for good kicking around at Ukie, which is exciting. We've got one in the office today, which is fantastic. But yeah, from your perspective, obviously, business perspective, I mean, what would you sort of say about sort of creating going into things, creating a non-profit? I guess from the first case, non-profit doesn't mean that you don't pay yourself or your staff, so you can make it, sustainable. But yeah, it'd be really, really good to hear from your perspective.
So I'm only very recently a trustee of a charity as of about 2 weeks ago. So I am now slightly more educated to speak on this than I have previously. I've not seen this ever come up before, so it's a really good question. Whether could you be a non-profit or a charity and run a successful company? I don't see why not. I guess it's just you have to be prepared for an extra level of bureaucracy and rules on top of running a business, because ultimately you will have very specific roles and responsibilities, and in a sense you kind of almost have to, very much like an article of association in your company which kind of sets out the rules of your company. It's even more prescriptive if you're running a non-profit or charity. You very much have to stick to like what is your core mantra and sense of public benefit for the company. So this is quite a fluffy answer. I don't see why it isn't possible, but it will no doubt come with complications.
Could it affect your ability to diversify? Could you end up sort of restricting yourself in such a way, perhaps?
Possibly, because you would have to comply with a certain amount of, there's certain rules and laws that govern how charities and non-profits operate. And if you want to change the way you allocate funds within your company, or change the overall purpose of the non-profit or charity, that takes a bit of time and care and thought. It's not as easy as doing it for a company. Again, I'm only very much speaking with this as a 3-week-old charity trustee, but it's been quite an eye-opener for me seeing how there are different considerations at play. And I think you would have to constantly be balancing that need to make a successful product with ultimately having certain unmovable rules and restrictions around how your company can operate. And you also need a trustee or a board that understands those responsibilities.
I'd say that's the most important bit.
Yeah.
So I'm a trustee of Games Aid, and Games Aid has been going on for a long time now. But even constantly we're just kind of evaluating, what are we, what are we actually doing? But you need,
and it's what we're doing within.
I mean, obviously, when that comes with challenges, especially within the games industry, because if you're raising money for charities and the industry you're in, you're sort of revolving it around how the games industry is having its own issues. You're asking a lot from the sector, something to go, oh yeah, and other things of the type, can we help? Can you help us raise some money? Can we do this? Can we do that? So but having, I think, a range of different experiences, I think, at Games Aid, we've got a trustee level, and then it's sort of people who just, help constantly with the events that we do, but they've all got different backgrounds, and actually that kind of breadth of knowledge and understanding is so helpful. So yeah, it's as you said, it's definitely more than I thought. Who was involved in it, and you've got to kind of get all the legislation right and make sure you're everything you do to the Charities Commission is correct, and so yeah, it's not impossible, and I think it's a great thing to do, and I think there's definitely scope for it, but yeah, there's just a lot to consider. But whoever asked the question, if you want to speak to us at Games Aid about sort of how we've gone about it, in terms of passing that information on to people who are keen to do that, we're always happy to do that. So
fantastic. Yeah.
Couldn't they just make a profit and then donate the profit? Wouldn't that just be a lot easier? Or am I know very little about how charities run.
Depends, like what you want to reinvest into the product, like what the product is.
If there's a particular cause that they want to
I think
support.
If you're just supporting another like an actual cause, and yes, obviously every money you make, obviously you've got the costs of to run a charity, but then obviously you're trying to put as much of that back into into the actual charities you're supporting. So yeah, there's as I said, from a financial perspective, there's a lot to kind of look at, because there are still costs, and you've still got to, we still have full-time employees at Games Day, not many, but we still have, so we've got to still manage the costs as you would any business. So I think there's all the same skill sets that apply in terms of if you want to run your own business, regardless of whether it's a not-for-profit or, you need to understand all those fundamentals anyway. But and then it just, as my sort of words. But just, it comes with all of those extra bits. So just kind of, make sure you're fully aware of what you're going into before you dive into it. But it is very enjoyable.
The why. So why is not for profit the right route versus what you just suggested? Because there's a lot of extras that come from it, and it, as a business you can set up as a one and go from there and work it out from there. Whereas that's not the case with the charity. And there's a whole heap of additional compliance, legally, financially, and making sure you have the right people. It's, as you say, you've got a board of trustees that are running that charity, and the why is at the centre of it, of why you would want to go down that not-for-profit route versus.
Having a focus point is definitely important, because you can trial these different things, but fundamentally it's what are we? Games Day, we've got on amazing events, where we invite the games community and we raise money that way. So we did, and so at some point you start thinking, did we try and complicate that at one point? No, what do we do? We are putting on events to raise money for some fantastic charities.
That's it.
Keep it as simple as that, So because that's what the charity's always done. So I don't think you don't need to kind of go too far outside of as long as you're fixed on what you're doing and you have a clear goal. Same as any other business, you've got to just be fixed. And yes, you've got to still adapt to a point. But that's mainly just to do with how the industry is doing and all the people that you're working with. If you can't rely on sort of people just suddenly going, sure, I've got all this free cash, I'm just going to throw it. I don't mind doing that this time around. What's the next options? So.
Fantastic. Well, do you want to sort of?
Do we have time for final predictions? Yes. Okay. Right in the final few minutes. So, who wants to start with a future prediction to hopefully keep us buoyed for the future?
I think indie resurgence. We're going to see a great load of fantastic new games coming out. Going back to the fundamentals of what the game industry is. I think that's going to really drive us forward over the next couple of years for sure.
Yes.
I think I did forget to pack my crystal ball today, but is it a prediction or is it just a hope? I think maybe, the past almost 5 years have been bizarre in sort of every scale of it, and then looking at that in the games industry too, but hopefully a bit of stability, so whatever that looks like. These like really high highs and really low lows is a really exhausting cycle to be on. So acknowledging that whatever that looks like, whether it's that sort of hybrid employee role that we talked about before, or whatever the sort of business models, people coming up with sensible, sustainable models that can last, and trying to build from there.
No, I think I'd want to see. I want to see companies taking more risks. I don't mean from an insurance perspective. No, I mean with the games. There's been some really cool games that have seeming. I don't want to say any games come out of nowhere, but there's been some really successful games that are really interesting and doing new things with mechanics that no one's ever seen before, and that they can only come from an indie studio. And I've seen some really big games where everyone's just tried to play it safe. And you're in a market where there's so much other competition. We talked a lot about that today. There's so much competition, discoverability. And when you've got big budgets and you're afraid to do something weird, you do something kind of generic, and then you see a small indie studio that's done something that no one else had the guts to do, and they've done so well. So that's what I want to see. I want to see more of that, more weird games. I like weird. Yeah, I like weird. Yeah.
And I guess for me, I'd say keep an eye on the Southeast Asian market, both from a talent perspective and a consumer perspective. I think markets like Indonesia have seen massive growth post-COVID, and these kind of countries have historically had really good work for hire teams, but are now starting to branch out on their own and use that knowledge to make their own studios and their own IP. And I think we've definitely spoken to publishers that are interested in speaking to teams in those markets because they've got the talent, but it also tends to be a lot more cost effective than, say, speaking to a team in the US. They can make a game much cheaper. In a sense, almost like one step beyond what we're seeing now in China, where we've had things like Black Wukong and Marvel Rivals being made by pure Chinese studios making premium titles. That historically wasn't really happening. So I think we're going to see some surprises coming out of that market in the next few years.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, everyone. We'll end there. Just want to say thanks again for joining us, both on the webinar, on the Zoom, and thanks to everyone who's come into the Ukie office today. And thank you as well to our panel, who's been really, really fascinating. So thank you so much. Right, we will close down. Thank you.